What if Anakin received a black Kyber crystal from Ilum? Let's explore the depths of it in the video. The frigid winds of Ilum howl through the jagged ice caverns as Anakin Skywalker presses forward, deeper than any Padawan has ventured in over 3 centuries. The usual path to the crystal caves feels fundamentally wrong to him somehow, as if the Force itself is actively guiding him away from the well-trodden routes where generations of Jedi have found their crystal. Each step takes him further from the familiar blue and green glows that traditionally call to young Force users, and deeper into passages that seem to exist outside of time itself. He takes a deep breath, watching the vapor freeze instantly in the sub-zero air, and tries to channel the Force as Master Obi-Wan taught him. But instead of the calm, centered feeling he's learned to associate with proper Jedi meditation, something entirely different responds to his call. It's not the warm light he expects, nor the seductive whisper of darkness he's been warned about. This is something ancient, something that predates the very concepts of light and dark, as the modern galaxy understands them. The deeper Anakin ventures into these forgotten passages, the more alien the environment becomes. Ice formations twist into unnatural shapes around him, defying the laws of physics in ways that suggest they were carved by Force users millennia ago. The very air seems to whisper with voices from a time when the galaxy was young, when the Force was understood differently, when the rigid divisions that now define galactic civilization simply did not exist. As he runs his fingers along strange symbols carved into the cavern walls, they pulse with an energy that makes his fingertips tingle. The markings are clearly ancient, predating not just the Jedi Order but the very Republic itself. They speak of concepts that have no modern equivalents. Balance, not as the absence of conflict, but as the perfect synthesis of opposing forces. Power, not as domination over others, but as harmony with the fundamental nature of existence. Emotion, not as weakness to be suppressed, but as strength to be understood and channeled. The passage slopes downward for what feels like hours, taking Anakin deeper beneath Ilum's surface than any published map indicates is possible. The temperature should be killing him at this depth, but somehow the Force sustains him, wrapping him in a cocoon of energy that feels neither warm nor cold, but perfectly balanced between the two extremes. His breath no longer fogs in the air, and his steps echo with a resonance that suggests the spaces around him are far larger than they appear. At the end of the passage, Anakin finds himself standing before a massive circular chamber that defies every expectation he had about the crystal caves of Ilum. The walls are covered from floor to ceiling with intricate carvings that tell a story spanning thousands of years. These aren't crude pictographs or simple religious symbols, but sophisticated artwork that depicts scenes of incredible complexity and beauty. The images show Force users who carry neither the traditional lightsabers of the Jedi nor the crimson blades that would later become associated with the Sith. Instead, these ancient figures wield weapons of pure shadow, blades that seem to absorb light rather than emit it. Their faces are serene yet powerful, showing neither the rigid stoicism that characterizes modern Jedi, nor the passionate hatred that defines the Sith. These are beings who have achieved something that the current galaxy believes to be impossible: perfect balance between light and dark. In the center of the chamber sits a single crystal formation unlike anything Anakin has ever seen or heard described. Where normal Kyber crystals glow with internal light, this one seems to absorb the very concept of illumination, creating an aura of profound stillness that makes the air around it shimmer like heat waves in reverse. The crystal isn't simply black in the way that obsidian or space itself is black. It's an active void that seems to exist in a state of perfect equilibrium between presence and absence. As Anakin approaches, every instinct screams at him to turn back. This goes against everything he's been taught about how the gathering is supposed to work. Padawans are meant to find crystals that call to their inner light, that resonate with their potential for good. This crystal doesn't call to his light or his darkness. It calls to something deeper, something that encompasses both and transcends the artificial boundaries the modern galaxy has imposed on the Force. But he takes another step forward anyway, because in his heart, Anakin has always known that he doesn't fit the traditional mold of what a Jedi should be. His emotions run too hot, his attachments cut too deep, and his dreams reach too far beyond the conservative boundaries that the Council considers safe. Perhaps this is why the Force has led him here, to discover a path that might actually accommodate who he truly is, rather than demanding he become someone else. The moment his boots cross the threshold into the inner circle surrounding the crystal, visions begin to flood his consciousness with an intensity that drives him to his knees. But these aren't the frightening glimpses of possible futures that plague his nightmares about his mother or his dreams about Padme. These are memories, impossibly ancient memories that belong to the Force itself. He sees the very first Force users, beings who lived in harmony with the cosmic energy that flows through all living things. They understood that the Force isn't a tool to be wielded or a master to be served, but a partner to be worked with. They use their emotions as focusing elements rather than obstacles to overcome, channeling love into protection, anger into justice, fear into caution, and joy into creation. They were healers and warriors, builders and destroyers, depending on what the galaxy needed from them at any given moment. These ancient Force users, who called themselves the Grey Wardens, served as mediators and peacekeepers without the constraints of rigid dogma. They intervened where intervention was needed and stepped back when their presence would cause more harm than good. They used the dark side when the situation demanded it without being consumed by it. And they embraced the light side without becoming blinded by their own righteousness. Most importantly, they understood that true mastery came not from choosing a side in some cosmic war between good and evil, but from acknowledging that such a war was itself an illusion created by limited perspective. The visions show him techniques that have been lost for millennia, ways of channeling the Force that modern Jedi would consider impossible and Sith would dismiss as weakness. He sees meditation practices that incorporate rather than suppress emotion, combat forms that blend aggressive and defensive techniques seamlessly, and healing methods that work by restoring natural balance rather than imposing artificial harmony. But more than techniques, the visions show him a philosophy that speaks to every doubt he's ever had about the Jedi way. The Grey Wardens believed that attachment and detachment were both valuable states of being, depending on the circumstances. They taught that passion and serenity were complementary rather than contradictory, and that true wisdom came from understanding when to embrace each. They saw love not as a path to suffering, but as the highest expression of the Force's creative power. As the visions continue, Anakin begins to understand why this knowledge was lost. The galaxy went through a period of terrible conflict, a war so devastating that it shattered the Grey Warden's civilization. and scattered their survivors to the farthest corners of known space. In the aftermath, those who remembered the ancient ways split into two factions: those who blamed the war on the use of dark side techniques and formed the early Jedi Order, and those who blamed it on the weakness of light side philosophy and eventually became the Sith. Both groups convinced themselves that their interpretation was the only correct one, that the balanced approach of their predecessors had been fundamentally flawed. They created mythologies that painted their enemies as monsters and themselves as heroes, gradually forgetting that they were both fragments of a greater whole. The black crystal before him is one of the last remnants of that lost civilization, a tool created by masters who understood the Force in ways that neither modern Jedi nor Sith can comprehend. Anakin hesitates for what feels like hours but is probably only moments. Every fiber of his training tells him this is dangerous, that he should leave immediately and report what he's found to the Council. But the visions have shown him something that resonates with his deepest self. A path that doesn't require him to choose between his human emotions and his Force abilities, between his love for others and his duty to the galaxy. With trembling hands, he reaches for the crystal. The moment his fingers make contact, a shock of energy courses through him that makes his previous understanding of the Force seem like a child's drawing compared to a master's masterpiece. Every cell in his body suddenly feels connected to every other living thing in the galaxy. Not through some mystical oneness that erases individual identity, but through a vast web of relationships that honors both unity and diversity. His anger about slavery on Tatooine doesn't disappear, but it transforms into a focused determination to end suffering wherever he finds it. His fear about losing those he loves becomes a deeper understanding of how precious each moment of connection truly island. His frustration with the Jedi Council's limitations evolves into compassion for beings who are doing their best within the constraints of their own understanding. For the first time in his life, Anakin feels truly complete. The constant internal struggle between his emotions and his training, between his desire to help and his obligation to obey, simply evaporates. He's still himself, still passionate and driven, and occasionally reckless. But now he has a framework for channeling those qualities constructively rather than fighting against them. The crystal itself seems to merge with his very essence, not changing who he is, but revealing aspects of himself that were always there, waiting to be acknowledged. When he finally constructs his lightsaber using techniques the visions have taught him, the weapon that emerges is unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The hilt is elegant yet practical, inscribed with the same ancient symbols he found in the chamber walls. The activation stud is positioned perfectly for his grip, and the weight distribution feels like an extension of his own arm. But when he ignites the blade for the first time, the sight stops his breath entirely. The lightsaber doesn't emit light in any traditional sense. Instead, it creates a void of pure shadow that seems to exist in a space between dimensions. The blade is completely silent, producing no hum or crackle, and looking directly at it creates the disorienting sensation of staring into the space between stars. Yet despite its apparent absence of substance, when he swings it experimentally, it cuts through solid ice as easily as any normal lightsaber. More importantly, wielding the weapon feels absolutely natural. Where other lightsabers require careful focus to control their plasma containment, his black blade responds to his intentions as directly as his own hand. It's not a tool he's wielding so much as an expression of his will made manifest. a perfect synthesis of technology and force manipulation that represents everything the Grey Warden stood for. Hours later, Anakin emerges from the depths carrying more than just a new weapon. He's carrying knowledge that could revolutionize how the galaxy understands the Force. Techniques that could end the eternal conflict between light and dark, and a perspective that might actually bring the balance to the Force that the Jedi prophecies speak of. But as he makes his way back to the transport that brought him to Ilum, he realizes that convincing anyone else of these truths will be far more difficult than discovering them. The other Padawans who participated in the gathering are already returning to their ship, excitedly comparing their new lightsabers and sharing stories about their experiences in the crystal caves. Anakin listens to their tales of triumph and discovery, noting how similar their experiences were to each other and how different his own journey has been. They found crystals that confirmed their existing understanding of the Force. He found something that challenged every assumption he's ever held about reality itself. When he finally arrives at the ship, Master Obi-Wan is waiting with the proud expression of a teacher whose student has completed an important milestone. But that expression falters when he sees the weapon hanging from Anakin's belt. Its unusual design immediately marking it as something unprecedented in Jedi history. Obi-Wan: Anakin, what exactly did you find down there? That doesn't look like any lightsaber I've ever seen. Anakin: it's complicated, Master. The Force led me to something I wasn't expecting to find. Something ancient. Obi-Wan: may I see it? Anakin hesitates, then slowly draws the weapon and activates it. The void blade springs to life with its characteristic silence, and Obi-Wan steps back involuntarily as his eyes try to process something that shouldn't be possible to perceive. Obi-Wan: Anakin, what is that? It's not emitting light at all. How is that possible? Anakin: the crystal showed me things, Master. Visions of Force users from before the Jedi Order existed. They had a different understanding of how the Force works, and this weapon is based on their techniques. Obi-Wan: before the Jedi Order? Anakin: the Jedi have been the guardians of peace and justice for over 25,000 years. There couldn't have been Force users before us who had more advanced techniques. Anakin: that's just it, Master. They weren't more advanced, they were different. They didn't see the Force as something to be divided into light and dark sides. They saw it as a spectrum to be understood and balanced. The conversation is interrupted by their arrival at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. But Anakin can see the concern growing in his master's eyes. He knows that word of his unusual discovery will spread quickly through the temple. And he's not at all certain how the Council will react to evidence that their fundamental understanding of the Force might be incomplete. His concerns prove justified. Within hours of their return, word of Anakin's black lightsaber has reached every corner of the temple. The training session where he first demonstrates the weapon becomes a spectacle that draws Jedi from across the complex. Masters and Padawans alike gather to witness something that shouldn't exist according to their understanding of Kyber crystal properties. When Anakin ignites the blade, the assembled crowd falls silent. Several of the younger Padawans actually step backward, while some of the older masters exchange glances that speak of deep concern. The weapon itself seems to affect the very air around it, creating a subtle distortion that makes everyone present acutely aware that they're witnessing something unprecedented. Knight Ila Secura: I've never seen anything like it. The blade isn't just black, it's absent. It's like looking at a hole in reality. Master Luminara Unduli. The Force signature is unlike anything in our archives. It's neither light nor dark, but something else entirely, something that predates our understanding of such classifications. Padawan Barris Offi. Is it safe? It doesn't feel dangerous. Exactly. But it doesn't feel like a normal lightsaber either. The demonstration is quickly shut down, and Anakin finds his weapon confiscated pending a full council review. But the damage is already done. Every Force user in the temple can sense that something fundamental has changed. Some view it as a sign of hope, evidence that there are still mysteries to discover and new ways to grow. Others see it as a threat to the stability and tradition that have kept the Jedi Order strong for millennia. The council chambers buzz with tension as all 12 masters convene for an emergency session. The black lightsaber sits on the central table like an accusation. Its very presence, challenging assumptions that none of them have ever thought to question. Master Yoda examines the weapon with his ancient eyes, and for the first time in decades, he looks genuinely uncertain. Mace Windu. This is beyond unprecedented. A black crystal from Ilum should be impossible. The entire purpose of the gathering is for young Jedi to find crystals that resonate with their connection to the light side of the Force. Ki Adi Mundi. Could this be some form of corruption? Perhaps young Skywalker unknowingly touched the dark side during his trial and influenced the crystal's properties. Shakti. I've examined the weapon extensively. There's no trace of dark side corruption. Whatever this is, it's something entirely different from anything we've encountered. Yoda. Corruption. This is not ancient. This crystal island, from a time before Jedi and Sith, it comes. Forgotten knowledge, young Skywalker has found. The statement sends ripples of shock through the assembled masters. Yoda is the oldest among them, with nearly 900 years of experience, and his knowledge of Force history is unparalleled. If he believes this artifact predates the Jedi Order itself, the implications are staggering. Obi-Wan. Master Yoda, surely you're not suggesting that there were Force users before the Jedi who had more advanced understanding than we do? The Order has grown and learned continuously for 25 millennia. Yoda. Grown. Yes. Learned, perhaps, but narrowed also, have we? In the beginning, broader was the understanding of the Force. Split into light and dark it became. When Great War tore the galaxy apart, survivors, different paths they chose. Remember the ancient ways? Few do. Mace Windu. Even if we accept that this crystal has ancient origins, we still have to consider the implications for young Skywalker. He's already shown concerning attachment issues and difficulty with emotional control. Giving him access to unprecedented Force techniques could be extremely dangerous. Adigalia. I agree with Master Windu. The boy has potential, but he's also unpredictable. We've all sensed the darkness in him, the anger and fear that could easily be exploited by Sith manipulation. This weapon might amplify those dangerous tendencies. Plo Koon. But consider the alternative perspective. Perhaps the reason Anakin struggles with traditional Jedi training is because the traditional approach isn't suited to his nature. If these ancient techniques offer a different path to balance, shouldn't we at least investigate the possibility? Coleman Trebo. It's too risky. We have over 25,000 years of proven methodology. Why abandon what we know works for something we don't understand? Satian. Because what we know works might not be working as well as we think. Look at the galaxy around us. The Republic is corrupt, the Senate is paralyzed by special interests, and conflicts break out across the outer rim while we debate procedure. Maybe it's time to consider that our approach has limitations. The debate continues for hours, with the Council split almost evenly between those who see Anakin's discovery as an opportunity and those who view it as a threat. The younger masters, particularly those who have served in the field and seen firsthand how the Order's rigid adherence to tradition sometimes prevents them from helping those in need, are more open to exploring new possibilities. The older masters, who remember periods when deviation from orthodox teachings led to students falling to the dark side, are understandably more cautious. Eventually, they reach a compromise that satisfies no one but represents their best attempt to balance competing concerns. Anakin will be allowed to remain in the Order, but he will be forbidden from using the black lightsaber until the Council completes a thorough investigation of its properties and origins. In the meantime, he'll be given a standard crystal to construct a replacement weapon and will continue his training as if nothing has changed. Master Windu delivers the decision personally, his expression stern but not unkind, as he explains the Council's reasoning. Mace Windu, Anakin, you must understand that we're not rejecting your discovery out of fear or ignorance. The responsibility of the Jedi is to protect the galaxy, and that means being extremely careful about forces we don't fully understand. Until we know more about this weapon and its origins, it's simply too dangerous to allow you to use it, Anakin. But Master Windu, the visions I experienced showed me techniques that could help people, methods of healing that work faster than anything we currently know, meditation practices that could help Jedi overcome emotional difficulties, combat forms that could end conflicts with minimal casualties. If these ancient Force users really did have more complete understanding than we do, shouldn't we be eager to learn from them? Mace Windu. Perhaps. But the Sith also promise power that could help people, and we've seen how those promises turn out. The fact that something is ancient doesn't automatically make it wise or safe. Some knowledge is lost for good reasons, Anakin. So you're just going to lock it away and pretend it doesn't exist? Mace Windu. We're going to study it carefully and thoroughly before making any decisions about how to proceed. That's what responsible guardians do. In the meantime, you'll construct a new lightsaber using a standard crystal and continue your training. If our investigation reveals that these ancient techniques are safe and beneficial, we'll consider incorporating them into your education. The black lightsaber is taken to the Temple Archives, where it joins countless other artifacts that the Jedi have collected over the millennia. But unlike most items in the collection, this one continues to radiate an aura that affects everyone who comes near it. Archivists report difficulty concentrating when working in the same room, not because the weapon projects any form of malevolent influence, but because it seems to expand their awareness beyond comfortable boundaries. Meanwhile, Anakin does his best to comply with the Council's decision. He constructs a new lightsaber using a blue crystal, following standard Jedi procedures and trying to pretend that his experience on Ilum never happened. But the knowledge he gained in that ancient chamber has fundamentally changed him in ways that no Council decision can reverse. During meditation sessions, he finds himself automatically incorporating techniques he learned from the visions, methods that make his connection to the Force stronger and more stable than anything traditional Jedi training ever achieved. In combat practice, his movements flow between aggressive and defensive forms with a fluidity that impresses his instructors, even as it concerns them. Most tellingly, his emotional control improves dramatically, not because he's learned to suppress his feelings, but because he's found ways to channel them constructively. The other Padawans notice the change immediately. Where once Anakin was prone to outbursts of frustration or displays of arrogance, he now possesses a centeredness that rivals some of the masters. He still feels anger and fear and love just as intensely as before, but those emotions no longer control him. Instead, he uses them as sources of information and motivation, understanding what each feeling is trying to tell him and responding appropriately. Ahsoka Tano, who has recently been assigned as Obi-Wan's second Padawan, finds herself particularly intrigued by the changes in Anakin. She's heard the stories about his black lightsaber and the Council's concerns, but what she observes directly contradicts the narrative that his discovery was dangerous or corrupting. Ahsoka, Anakin, can I ask you something about what happened on Ilum? Anakin, I'm not supposed to discuss it. Council orders. Ahsoka, I'm not asking for specifics. I just want to understand why everyone seems so worried about what you found. You seem better, more balanced. Whatever you experienced, it helped you, didn't it? Anakin. He pauses, looking around to make sure they're not being overheard. Yes, it did. The techniques I learned don't eliminate emotions the way traditional Jedi training tries to. They teach you how to work with emotions, how to understand what they're telling you, and use that information wisely. Ahsoka, that sounds like it could help a lot of people. Why is the Council so opposed to investigating it? Anakin. Because it challenges everything they believe about how the Force works. They've spent 25,000 years building an understanding based on the idea that light and dark are separate, opposing forces. The idea that there might be a third option, something that incorporates both sides into a balanced whole, threatens the foundation of everything they've built. Ahsoka. But if it works better than the traditional approach, shouldn't they want to learn about it? Anakin. You'd think so. But institutions don't usually embrace changes that make their current methods look inadequate. It's easier to dismiss new ideas as dangerous than to admit that your old ideas might be incomplete. These conversations become more frequent as Anakin's fellow students observe the positive changes in his behavior and demeanor. Some begin to ask pointed questions about whether the traditional Jedi approach is really the best way to handle the complexities of emotion and attachment. Others start to wonder why the Council is so quick to label unfamiliar techniques as dangerous without even investigating them properly. The situation becomes more complicated when reports begin reaching the Temple about unusual activities in the galaxy at large. Independent Force users, individuals who never received formal Jedi training, are demonstrating abilities that seem to blend light and dark side techniques. Some are using their powers to protect civilians in areas where the Republic's authority is weak, while others are working to mediate conflicts that conventional diplomacy has failed to resolve. These Grey Force users, as the HoloNet begins calling them, don't fit into either the Jedi or Sith categories that most people use to understand Force abilities. They show neither the emotional restraint that characterizes Jedi nor the passionate hatred associated with Sith, but rather a pragmatic approach that uses whatever techniques are most appropriate for the situation at hand. Master T. The reports are consistent across multiple systems. These individuals appear to be using Force techniques that our archives don't recognize, methods that seem to draw on both light and dark side applications without the practitioners being corrupted by either extreme. Master Kuhn. Could they have found similar artifacts to the one young Skywalker discovered? Perhaps there are more of these ancient crystals scattered throughout the galaxy. Yoda. Possible it island, but more likely awakening something. Island. The crystal young Skywalker found. A focal point it may be, dormant knowledge. Stirring it might be throughout the galaxy. Mace Windu. If that's true, then we need to decide how to respond. Do we attempt to recruit these individuals and train them in proper Jedi methods? Or do we treat them as potential threats to galactic stability? The question proves more complex than anyone anticipated. When Jedi teams are sent to investigate these Grey Force users, they discover individuals who are often more effective at resolving conflicts and protecting civilians than traditionally trained Jedi. Their methods are unorthodox and sometimes concerning to observers raised on strict light side doctrine, but their results speak for themselves. On Ryloth, a Grey Force user named Kef Vrad has ended a decades-long clan war by using techniques that blend Force persuasion with carefully controlled applications of fear. Traditional Jedi diplomacy had failed repeatedly in the same situation, but Vrad's approach forced the warring factions to confront the true costs of their conflict while offering them a face-saving way to make peace. On Malastare, another Grey practitioner named Sela Typho has established a network of healers who use emotional resonance techniques to treat trauma and mental illness. Their success rate far exceeds anything achieved by conventional medicine or traditional Jedi healing methods, largely because they acknowledge and work with their patients' negative emotions rather than trying to eliminate them. Perhaps most concerning to the Jedi Council, these individuals consistently refuse offers to join the Order. They respect the Jedi's commitment to peace and justice, but they reject the philosophical constraints that they see as limiting the Order's effectiveness. Some even go so far as to argue that the Jedi's rigid adherence to light side doctrine actually prevents them from achieving their stated goals. Kef Vrad. I appreciate what you're trying to do, Master Jedi, but I've seen how your methods work in practice. You mediate conflicts by imposing artificial calm on all parties, but you don't address the underlying issues that caused the conflict in the first place. The anger and fear and resentment are still there, just buried beneath a layer of imposed serenity. It works for a while, but eventually those suppressed emotions find a way to surface, usually in more destructive ways than before. Master Luminara. Our methods have maintained galactic peace for millennia. Surely that success speaks for itself. Kef Vrad. Has it really? Look around you, Master. The Republic is falling apart. Corruption is rampant. Entire regions are in open revolt, and conflicts break out constantly across the Outer Rim. If your methods were truly successful, would the galaxy be in such a state? Master Luminara. The current difficulties are the result of political and economic factors, not failures in Jedi philosophy. Kef Vrad. Are they? Or are they the inevitable result of suppressing rather than addressing fundamental problems? When you teach people to ignore their anger instead of understanding what's causing it, when you discourage attachment instead of helping people form healthy relationships, when you impose artificial harmony instead of working toward genuine resolution, you create the conditions for exactly the kind of instability we're seeing now. These conversations, repeated across dozens of worlds, begin to filter back to the Jedi Council through field reports and intelligence briefings. The Masters find themselves confronting challenges to their fundamental worldview from individuals who are achieving remarkable success using methods that Jedi doctrine claims should be impossible or dangerous. At the same time, Anakin's own development continues to accelerate in ways that make his instructors increasingly uncomfortable. His lightsaber technique has evolved to incorporate movements from forms that haven't been taught in the temple for centuries, yet he executes them with perfect control and devastating effectiveness. His Force abilities now encompass techniques that blur the traditional boundaries between disciplines, combining elements of healing, persuasion, and enhancement in ways that shouldn't work according to established theory. Most disturbing to some masters, Anakin has begun questioning fundamental aspects of Jedi philosophy in ways that reveal uncomfortable inconsistencies in their teaching. His questions aren't rebellious or disrespectful, but rather thoughtful challenges that force his instructors to examine beliefs they've never thought to doubt. Anakin, Master Obi-Wan, I've been thinking about the Jedi Code, and there's something I don't understand. Obi-Wan, what's troubling you, my young Padawan? Anakin, the code says there is no emotion, there is peace. But emotions are a natural part of being alive. They're how we connect with others and understand our environment. If we eliminate emotion entirely, don't we also eliminate our ability to truly understand the people we're supposed to help? Obi-Wan, the code doesn't ask us to eliminate emotion, Anakin. It asks us to find peace despite emotion, to not let our feelings control our actions, Anakin. But that's not what the training teaches, is it? We're told to suppress anger, to avoid attachment, to maintain serenity at all costs. We're not taught how to work with our emotions constructively. We're taught to pretend they don't exist. How can we help someone who's grieving if we've never allowed ourselves to fully experience grief? How can we understand a parent's love for their child if we're forbidden from forming deep attachments ourselves? Obi-Wan, Anakin, the Jedi way has preserved peace in the galaxy for 25,000 years. Surely that success demonstrates the validity of our approach. Anakin, has it really preserved peace, though? Or has it just maintained a status quo that benefits some people while others suffer in silence? Look at Tatooine, where slavery is legal and the Republic does nothing to stop it. Look at the corporate sector, where entire planets are strip-mined for profit while their populations live in poverty. Look at the Outer Rim, where conflicts break out constantly because the central government is too corrupt or incompetent to address basic needs. If our methods were truly successful, would these problems persist for generations without meaningful action from the guardians of peace and justice? These conversations begin to spread beyond Anakin's immediate circle as other young Jedi overhear them and start asking similar questions. The Temple's training masters find themselves dealing with a generation of students who are no longer content to accept traditional answers to fundamental questions about the Force and the Jedi's role in the galaxy. The situation reaches a breaking point when news arrives of a major crisis on Naboo. The Trade Federation has imposed a blockade on the peaceful planet in retaliation for Queen Amidala's opposition to a taxation bill in the Senate. The situation is complex, involving corporate interests, political corruption, and questions about the Republic's authority in member systems. The Jedi Council decides to send a team to investigate and hopefully mediate a peaceful resolution. Master Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi are selected for the mission, and despite concerns about his recent behavior, Anakin is included as an observer who might benefit from exposure to real-world diplomacy. But the mission goes wrong almost immediately. The Trade Federation's blockade is backed by a massive droid army, and their representatives have no interest in negotiating. When the Jedi team attempts to land on Naboo to speak with Queen Amidala, they're attacked by Federation forces and forced to fight their way to the planet's surface. The invasion of Naboo becomes a turning point for Anakin in ways that no one anticipates. Witnessing the suffering of innocent civilians under droid occupation, seeing Queen Amidala's desperate attempts to protect her people, and observing the Republic's complete failure to provide meaningful assistance, crystallizes everything he's been feeling about the limitations of traditional Jedi methods. When Qui-Gon insists they must follow proper diplomatic channels despite the obvious humanitarian crisis, when Obi-Wan argues they cannot take direct action without explicit authorization from the Council, when both masters continue to speak of patience and proper procedure while people die around them, Anakin realizes that his doubts about the Jedi way aren't just philosophical disagreements, they're moral imperatives. That night, while his masters sleep in their hidden camp, Anakin makes a decision that will change the course of galactic history. Using techniques he learned from the ancient visions, he infiltrates the Trade Federation's command ship alone and destroys their primary control computer. The action disables the entire droid army and ends the invasion in a single stroke, saving thousands of lives and freeing Naboo from occupation. But when he returns to the camp, instead of gratitude or approval, he faces anger and disappointment from the two Jedi he respects most. Qui-Gon: Anakin, what you did was incredibly reckless. You had no authorization for that action, no backup if things went wrong, and no consideration for the broader political implications of your interference. Anakin: people were dying, Master. The Trade Federation was using its droid army to terrorize civilians and force Queen Amidala into submission. How is stopping that a bad thing? Obi-Wan: the ends don't justify the means. Anakin: the Jedi serve the Republic, and that means working within established legal and political frameworks. If we start taking unilateral action based on our own judgment of right and wrong, we become vigilantes rather than peacekeepers. Anakin: and if we don't take action when we're the only ones capable of stopping atrocities, what does that make us? Accomplices to suffering? Enablers of injustice? The Republic wasn't going to do anything to help Naboo. The Senate was deadlocked by corporate interests and political maneuvering. If we hadn't acted, how many more people would have died while we waited for proper authorization? Qui-Gon: Anakin, I understand your frustration, but the galaxy is more complex than you realize. Actions have consequences that extend far beyond their immediate effects. By destroying the Trade Federation's control ship, you may have prevented suffering on Naboo, but you've also set a precedent that could lead to chaos throughout the Republic. Anakin, What kind of precedent? That Force users will protect innocent people even when their governments won't. That seems like a precedent worth setting. The argument continues as they travel back to Coruscant, but it becomes clear that they're not just debating tactics or procedures. They're arguing about fundamentally different visions of what the Jedi should be and how they should relate to the galaxy around them. Anakin sees the Order as potentially powerful force for good that's been constrained by outdated traditions and political timidity. His masters see him as a promising student who's been corrupted by dangerous ideas and needs to be guided back to the proper path. When they return to the temple, Anakin faces the full council for what everyone realizes will be a pivotal moment in his Jedi career. The Masters have reviewed reports of his unauthorized action on Naboo, and their reactions range from cautious approval to outright condemnation. Master Windu, Anakin, your actions on Naboo demonstrated both remarkable skill and troubling judgment. You successfully ended a crisis that might have continued for months, but you did so by completely disregarding the chain of command and the principles that guide Jedi involvement in galactic affairs. Anakin, with respect, Master Windu, what principles were those? The principle that says we should watch innocents suffer while we wait for permission to help them. The principle that says political procedure is more important than preventing atrocities? Because if those are our principles, then maybe our principles are wrong, Master Gallia. You're speaking of fundamental changes to how the Jedi Order has operated for 25 millennia. Do you really believe you have the wisdom to judge the entire structure of our organization? Anakin, I'm not judging the organization, Master. I'm judging specific decisions and policies that seem to prevent us from fulfilling our stated mission. If our goal is to be guardians of peace and justice, then we should be willing to act when peace and justice are threatened, regardless of whether we have political authorization. Master Kun, but who decides what constitutes a threat serious enough to justify unilateral action? If every Jedi makes those decisions independently, we cease to be an organization and become a collection of individual vigilantes with no accountability to anyone but themselves. Anakin, and if no Jedi ever makes those decisions independently, we become a tool of whatever political system we're embedded in, regardless of whether that system is just or corrupt. Look at the Republic right now. The Senate is paralyzed by special interests, the bureaucracy is riddled with corruption, and entire regions are ignored because they don't have enough political influence to matter. If we only act when that system authorizes us to act, we're not serving peace and justice. We're serving the interests of those who control the system. Yoda, concerned by your words, I am, young Skywalker, dangerous. The path you describe can lead to arrogance and tyranny. It might think themselves above the law. Those with power do. When accountable to none, they become Anakin. But Master Yoda, isn't that exactly what happened with the Sith? They became so focused on their own power and their own vision of how the galaxy should work that they lost sight of the people they were supposed to serve. I'm not advocating for that kind of arrogance. I'm advocating for accountability to something higher than political convenience or institutional tradition. I'm advocating for accountability to the Force itself and to the living beings it connects. The exchange reveals the depth of the philosophical divide that has opened between Anakin and the Council. They're not just disagreeing about specific policies or procedures. They're operating from fundamentally different understandings of what it means to be a Force user and how such abilities should be employed in service to the galaxy. The Council's decision, when it comes, reflects their deep uncertainty about how to handle a situation without precedent in their history. Anakin will be allowed to remain in the Order, but he will be placed under strict supervision and forbidden from participating in any missions until he demonstrates a willingness to accept traditional Jedi discipline. His training will focus heavily on meditation and philosophical instruction, with the goal of helping him understand why the Order's methods have evolved as they have. But most significantly, he will be permanently forbidden from accessing his black lightsaber or pursuing any further investigation into the ancient techniques he discovered on Ilum. The Council has concluded that these influences have contributed to his rebellious attitude and his dangerous ideas about independent action. Mace Windu. Anakin, we're not giving up on you, but you need to understand that the Jedi way exists for good reasons. The constraints you chafe against aren't arbitrary limitations. They're safeguards that prevent Force users from becoming a threat to the very people they're meant to protect. We're asking you to trust in the wisdom of thousands of generations of Jedi who have faced these same challenges and found solutions that work, Anakin. And what if their solutions don't work anymore? What if the galaxy has changed in ways that make traditional methods inadequate? Are we supposed to keep following the same approaches even when they consistently fail to achieve our stated goals? Mace Windu, we're supposed to have faith that the Force will guide us to the right answers if we're patient and humble enough to listen. The kind of independent action you're advocating requires a level of personal certainty that no individual should possess. How can you be sure that your judgment is correct and the collective wisdom of the Council is wrong? Anakin, I can't be sure, Master Windu, but I can see the results of our current approach, and they're not good enough. People are suffering while we debate procedure. Injustices are perpetuated while we wait for political authorization. Evil flourishes while we maintain our commitment to artificial neutrality. If the Force is really guiding us, then why aren't we more effective at preventing suffering and promoting justice? The conversation ends without resolution, as both sides realize they're operating from irreconcilable worldviews. The Council believes that institutional wisdom and collective decision-making provide essential safeguards against the corrupting influence of power. Anakin believes that individual conscience and direct action are necessary when institutions fail to fulfill their responsibilities. Over the following weeks, Anakin does his best to comply with the Council's restrictions while continuing to struggle with the philosophical contradictions he sees in Jedi doctrine. His supervised meditation sessions become exercises in frustration as his instructors try to guide him back toward traditional interpretations of the Force while he experiences realities that don't fit their explanations. The breaking point comes during a training session where Master Windu is attempting to teach Anakin about the dangers of emotional attachment. Using traditional examples and time-honored parables, he explains why Jedi must maintain emotional distance from others in order to serve the greater good effectively. Mace Windu. Anakin, imagine a scenario where you must choose between saving one person you love and saving 100 strangers. If you're emotionally attached to the individual, you might make the wrong choice and allow greater suffering to occur. This is why we teach detachment. Not because we don't care about people, but because we care about all people equally. Anakin. But Master, doesn't that example assume that love necessarily leads to selfishness? What if attachment actually motivates us to make better choices, not worse ones? What if loving someone deeply teaches us about the value of all life rather than making us care less about others? Mace Windu. Attachment leads to fear of loss, and fear leads to the dark side. This is one of the most fundamental truths of the Jedi way. Anakin. Is it? Because the visions I experienced on Ilum showed me Force users who maintain deep attachments throughout their lives without falling to darkness. They used their love for specific individuals as a foundation for understanding and protecting all life. Their attachments made them stronger and more compassionate, not weaker and more selfish. Mace Windu. Those visions could have been deceptions, Anakin. The dark side is subtle and can present itself as wisdom when it's actually leading you toward corruption, Anakin. Then how do we tell the difference? How do we know when something is genuine wisdom and when it's deception? Because if we can't trust our own experiences and judgment, then we're just following orders blindly. And if we're following orders blindly, how are we any different from the droids that attacked Naboo? The comparison strikes Master Windu as both insightful and deeply troubling. He recognizes the validity of Anakin's question, while also seeing how it undermines the entire structure of Jedi authority and tradition. If students are encouraged to question fundamental teachings based on personal experiences that contradict established doctrine, the Order risks fragmenting into competing schools of thought with no unifying principles or shared understanding. But at the same time, Anakin's points about the effectiveness of current methods are difficult to dismiss. The galaxy is becoming increasingly unstable. Conflicts are multiplying across the Outer Rim, and the Republic seems incapable of addressing the underlying issues that fuel these problems. Perhaps more disturbing, young Jedi throughout the Temple are beginning to ask similar questions about whether their training is preparing them to deal with the realities they'll face in the field. The situation becomes critical when reports arrive of a major incident involving one of the Grey Force users the Council has been monitoring. Kefrad, the individual who ended the clan wars on Ryloth, has been captured by Sith agents and is being tortured for information about ancient Force techniques. His situation presents the Jedi with a complex moral dilemma. Should they risk their own people to rescue someone who has explicitly rejected their authority and their methods? The debate in the council chambers is intense, with masters arguing passionately on both sides of the question. Master T. Vrad may not be a Jedi, but he's a Force user who has dedicated his life to protecting innocent people. We have a responsibility to help him if we can. Master Trevor. He chose his own path, knowing the risks involved. We can't justify endangering our people for someone who rejected our guidance and protection, Master Kuhn. But consider the larger implications. If we abandon Force users who work outside our organization, we're sending a message that only those who submit to our authority deserve protection. That undermines our claim to serve all life, not just those who follow our rules, Master Gallia. The Sith will use whatever they learn from Vrad against us. From a purely strategic standpoint, we can't allow them to extract knowledge about ancient Force techniques that we don't understand ourselves. Yoda. More at stake than one life, their island knows something about these ancient ways. The Sith do. Seeking power they cannot control. They may be dangerous for all. This could become The discussion continues for hours, but eventually, the Council reaches a decision that surprises many observers. They will mount a rescue mission, but it will be led by volunteers rather than assigned personnel, and it will operate outside official Jedi authority. This allows the Order to maintain plausible deniability while still taking action to protect a Force user who shares their fundamental goals, if not their methods. Anakin immediately volunteers for the mission, seeing it as an opportunity to put his unconventional training to use in service of genuine justice. To everyone's surprise, he's joined by several other young Jedi who have been influenced by his questions about traditional doctrine. Ahsoka Tano argues passionately for inclusion, despite her limited field experience. Barriss Offee volunteers as the mission's medic, explaining that her healing abilities might be crucial for treating whatever injuries Vrad has sustained. Even some of the older knights express interest in participating, curious about the opportunity to study these mysterious Grey Force techniques firsthand. Master Obi-Wan ultimately agrees to lead the mission, not because he supports Anakin's philosophical positions, but because he recognizes his duty to guide and protect his former Padawan through what promises to be a challenging and dangerous operation. The rescue mission takes the team deep into Sith space, to a fortress world where Kef Vrad is being held by agents of a mysterious Dark Lord, who seems particularly interested in ancient Force knowledge. The infiltration requires all of Anakin's unconventional techniques, as traditional Jedi stealth methods prove inadequate against defenses designed specifically to detect Force users. Using meditation techniques he learned from the ancient visions, Anakin manages to suppress his Force signature so completely that even other Jedi have difficulty sensing his presence. His black lightsaber training, though incomplete, allows him to move through shadows in ways that seem to bend the laws of physics. Most importantly, his understanding of emotional balance gives him the ability to maintain perfect calm, even in highly stressful situations. The rescue itself becomes a revelation for the entire team. When they reach Vrad's cell, they find him badly injured but unbroken. Having used Grey Force techniques to resist interrogation methods that would have broken most traditional Force users, his approach to pain and fear, treating them as information rather than enemies, has allowed him to maintain his sanity and his principles even under extreme duress. Kef Vrad, I was wondering when you Jedi would show up. Took you long enough to decide I was worth saving. Obi-Wan, we came as soon as we could organize a mission. How badly are you hurt? Kef Vrad, nothing that won't heal given time. But that's not the important question. The important question is what you're going to do about what I learned while I was here. Anakin, what do you mean? Kef Vrad, the Sith know about the ancient techniques, and they're trying to corrupt them for their own purposes. They've found fragments of Grey Warden teachings, and they're attempting to twist them into new forms of dark side manipulation. If they succeed, they'll have access to power that makes traditional Sith abilities look primitive. The revelation sends shockwaves through the rescue team. If the Sith are actively seeking to exploit ancient Force knowledge, then the Jedi's conservative approach to Anakin's discoveries may be putting the entire galaxy at risk. By refusing to study these techniques themselves, they're allowing their enemies to gain potentially decisive advantages. Barriss Offee, how is that possible? I thought the ancient techniques were supposed to be balanced, incorporating both light and dark elements safely. Kef Vrad, they are, when used properly. But the Sith aren't interested in balance. They're trying to extract the dark side elements while discarding the light side components that provide stability and ethical guidance. It's like trying to build a structure using only the supports while ignoring the foundation. The result is power without wisdom, strength without restraint. The escape from the Sith fortress becomes a running battle that tests every member of the team's abilities to their limits. Sith assassins emerge from hidden passages, their red lightsabers cutting through the darkness as they attempt to prevent the rescue team from escaping with their prisoner. But it also provides an opportunity for them to see Anakin's unconventional techniques in action under real combat conditions. His fighting style, which blends elements from multiple traditional forms while incorporating movements that seem to defy established lightsaber theory, proves devastatingly effective against opponents trained to counter standard Jedi methods. When 3 Sith warriors attempt to corner him in a narrow corridor, Anakin responds with a sequence of moves that flows seamlessly between Makashi precision strikes, Ataru acrobatics, and shadow step techniques that the ancient visions taught him. The Sith find themselves unable to predict his attacks because his combat style doesn't follow any single recognizable pattern. He strikes with gem. So power, when they expect Soresu defense, flows into Niman flexibility when they prepare for Shicho aggression, and uses force applications that blend traditionally separate disciplines in ways that confuse their tactical calculations. More importantly, his emotional control under pressure demonstrates the practical value of the ancient approaches he's been studying. Where other Jedi might be thrown off balance by the chaos and violence of the escape, Anakin remains centered and focused, using his fear and anger as sources of information rather than allowing them to compromise his judgment. When one Sith warrior taunts him about the futility of his rescue mission, instead of responding with either stoic indifference or passionate anger, Anakin acknowledges the emotion the words provoke and uses that energy to fuel a devastatingly precise counterattack. Ahsoka. How do you do that? Stay so calm when everything's falling apart around us? Anakin. I'm not calm, Ahsoka. I'm terrified and furious and desperate to get everyone home safely. But those feelings are telling me important things about our situation, and I need to listen to them rather than fighting against them. Fear tells me where the real dangers are. Anger gives me the energy to overcome obstacles. Desperation reminds me what's truly important. Ahsoka. That's not what they taught us at the temple. Anakin. No, it's not. But it works better than anything they did teach us. The return journey becomes an extended philosophical discussion as the team processes what they've experienced and learned. Vrad shares additional details about Grey Force techniques and the philosophy behind them. While the Jedi team members struggle to reconcile these new ideas with their traditional training, Obi-Wan finds himself particularly conflicted. His respect for Jedi tradition and his loyalty to the Council remain strong, but he can't deny the effectiveness of Anakin's methods or the validity of many of Vrad's arguments about the limitations of orthodox approaches. Obi-Wan. Kef, I have to ask, if these ancient techniques are as effective as they appear to be, why did the civilization that developed them ultimately fail? What caused the Great War that destroyed the Grey Wardens and led to the split between Jedi and Sith? Kef Vrad. That's exactly the right question, Master Kenobi. And the answer is both simpler and more complex than you might expect. The Grey Wardens didn't fail because their philosophy was wrong. They failed because they became complacent. They achieved such success in maintaining galactic balance that they stopped preparing for new challenges. When a truly unprecedented threat emerged, something that didn't fit their existing understanding of how conflict worked, they weren't adaptable enough to respond effectively. Baris Ophi. What kind of threat? Kefvrad. External invasion. Beings from outside the galaxy who had never encountered the Force before and therefore weren't affected by traditional Force-based conflict resolution methods. The Grey Warden's techniques for balancing light and dark, for mediating between opposing factions, for finding peaceful solutions to seemingly intractable problems, all assumed that their opponents shared certain fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. When faced with enemies who operated according to completely different principles, they discovered that their methods were less universally applicable than they had believed. Anakin. So what happened? Kefvrad. Panic. Desperate attempts to develop new techniques quickly. Factional disputes about the best way to respond. Some wardens argued for embracing darker methods to gain the power needed to repel the invasion. Others insisted that abandoning their principles would make them no better than their enemies. The unity that had made them strong became a source of weakness as they spent more time arguing with each other than fighting the actual threat. Obi-Wan. And that's what led to the split between light and dark philosophies? Kefvrad. Eventually, yes, the wardens who survived the war were traumatized and divided. Those who had seen their traditional methods fail became convinced that only overwhelming power could prevent future catastrophes, and they developed the techniques that would eventually become the foundation of Sith philosophy. Those who had seen the corruption that desperate measures could bring became convinced that only pure dedication to the light side could prevent future disasters, and they established the principles that would guide the early Jedi Order. The story provides a sobering reminder that even the most sophisticated philosophies and techniques can fail when faced with truly unprecedented challenges. But it also suggests that the current division between Jedi and Sith represents an overcorrection to historical trauma rather than an inevitable or necessary state of affairs. By the time they return to Coruscant, the rescue team has been fundamentally changed by their experiences. They've seen that alternative approaches to the Force can be both practical and ethical. They've witnessed the dangers of allowing enemies to monopolize certain types of knowledge, and they've begun to understand that the galaxy may be facing new challenges that require new solutions. Their report to the Council creates unprecedented upheaval within the Jedi Order. For the first time in centuries, a significant number of Jedi are openly questioning whether their traditional methods are adequate for the challenges they face. The younger generation, in particular, has been energized by proof that there are viable alternatives to orthodox doctrine. Master Yoda convenes a special session of the Council to address the implications of what the rescue team has learned. The discussion is more open and exploratory than usual, reflecting the recognition that the Order may need to evolve in order to survive the changing galactic environment. Yoda. Much to consider. We have ancient knowledge. Returning to the galaxy at Island dangerous in the wrong hands. This knowledge could be, but dangerous also. Ignoring it might prove. Master Windu. I still have serious concerns about encouraging our people to experiment with techniques we don't fully understand. The risk of corruption remains real, regardless of what ancient philosophies might suggest. Master Kun. But the risk of stagnation may be even greater. If we refuse to adapt while our enemies embrace new methods, we could find ourselves at a decisive disadvantage when it matters most. Master T. The young Jedi are already beginning to explore these ideas independently. If we don't provide guidance and structure for their investigations, they'll pursue them anyway. But without the safeguards and wisdom that formal training could provide. Anakin, who has been invited to participate in the session as the Order's primary expert on ancient techniques, speaks carefully but passionately about what he's learned. Anakin: Masters, I understand your concerns about the dangers of these methods, but I've been studying and practicing Grey Force techniques for months now, and I can tell you that they're not inherently more dangerous than traditional Jedi training. They're different, and they require different kinds of preparation and guidance, but they're not corrupting or evil in themselves. Master Gallia: But how can you be certain? The dark side is subtle and patient. Corruption might not manifest immediately. Anakin: Because the techniques themselves include safeguards against corruption. Traditional Jedi training tries to prevent contact with the dark side entirely, which means that when we do encounter it, we're unprepared to resist its influence. Grey Force methods teach you how to touch darkness safely, how to use it as a tool without being consumed by it. In some ways, that makes them more resistant to Sith manipulation, not less. Master Trevor: You're asking us to fundamentally change how we understand the Force and our relationship to it. That's not a decision that should be made lightly or quickly. Anakin: I'm not asking you to change anything immediately. I'm asking you to investigate these techniques seriously and systematically, instead of dismissing them out of fear. Set up controlled studies. Assign masters to research the historical records. Let volunteers experiment with the methods under careful supervision. Approach this like Jedi, using wisdom and careful analysis rather than reacting from emotion. The suggestion resonates with many council members who have been frustrated by their limited options for responding to the growing crisis. After extensive debate, they reach a compromise that represents a significant departure from traditional Jedi conservatism. The Order will establish a special research division dedicated to studying ancient Force techniques and their potential applications. Anakin will be appointed as the primary researcher, working under the supervision of a committee of masters who will ensure that all experiments are conducted safely and ethically. Volunteers from throughout the Order will be invited to participate in controlled studies of Grey Force methods, with careful monitoring for any signs of corruption or negative effects. Most significantly, Anakin will be allowed to reclaim his black lightsaber and complete his training in ancient combat techniques on the condition that he shares everything he learns with the research team and follows all safety protocols they establish. The announcement of the new research division sends shockwaves throughout the galaxy. For the first time in its history, the Jedi Order is officially acknowledging that their understanding of the Force might be incomplete and that alternative approaches might have value. The decision draws both praise and criticism from various sectors of galactic society, creating political and cultural ripple effects that extend far beyond the boundaries of Force user communities. Republic politicians worry that changes in Jedi philosophy might affect their reliability as peacekeepers and their willingness to follow governmental direction. Senator Bail Organa of Alderaan expresses concerns in a private meeting with Jedi representatives, arguing that institutional stability requires predictable behavior from the Order. If Jedi begin operating according to principles that political leaders don't understand, the traditional partnership between the Republic and the Force users could become strained or even collapse entirely. Corporate interests fear that more independent-minded Jedi might be less respectful of their business operations and more likely to intervene in disputes that were previously handled through political channels. The Trade Federation, still smarting from their defeat on Naboo, quietly begins lobbying against any expansion of Jedi authority or modification of their traditional constraints on political involvement. Banking clan representatives meet with Republic officials to discuss the potential economic implications of Jedi policy changes. They argue that galactic commerce depends on stable, predictable regulatory environments, and that philosophical uncertainty within the Order could create market instability that affects billions of beings throughout the galaxy. Meanwhile, marginalized populations across the galaxy see the development as a sign that the Jedi might finally be willing to take more direct action to address injustice and suffering. Slave communities on Outer Rim worlds quietly celebrate the news, hoping that Force users with more flexible approaches to intervention might succeed where traditional diplomatic methods have consistently failed. Refugee organizations and humanitarian groups begin reaching out to the Jedi Research Division, offering to serve as test cases for new approaches to conflict resolution and disaster relief. These groups have worked with traditionally trained Jedi for years and understand both the strengths and limitations of orthodox methods. They're eager to explore whether Grey Force techniques might provide more effective solutions to persistent problems. Academic institutions across the core worlds begin organizing symposiums and conferences to discuss the implications of rediscovered ancient Force knowledge. Historians, philosophers, xenobiologists, and political scientists all recognize that fundamental changes in Force user methodology could have profound effects on galactic civilization as a whole. The University of Coruscant establishes a new department dedicated to studying the intersection between Force philosophy and practical governance, while scholarly journals begin publishing papers that attempt to analyze Grey techniques from scientific and sociological perspectives. Religious organizations throughout the galaxy respond with a mixture of excitement and concern. Some see the acknowledgement of ancient Force traditions as validation of their own beliefs about the complexity and diversity of spiritual truth. Others worry that departures from established Jedi doctrine could undermine the moral authority that has helped maintain social stability for millennia. The Church of the Force, which has long advocated for broader recognition of non-Jedi Force traditions, issues a statement praising the Order's willingness to reconsider its assumptions. Meanwhile, more orthodox religious groups express concern that philosophical relativism could lead to moral confusion and social breakdown. Perhaps most significantly, the announcement triggers a wave of interest among individuals throughout the galaxy who possess Force sensitivity but have never received formal training. For generations, such people have faced the choice between joining the highly restrictive Jedi Order or attempting to develop their abilities independently without guidance or support. The possibility of training programs that accommodate different learning styles and philosophical approaches creates opportunities for millions of Force-sensitive beings who were previously excluded from any organized Force tradition. Recruitment centers begin receiving inquiries from adults who abandoned hopes of Force training years ago. From teenagers whose families couldn't afford to send them to Coruscant, and from individuals whose cultural backgrounds made traditional Jedi training inappropriate or impossible. The Sith response is immediate and violent. Recognizing that Jedi access to ancient Force techniques could upset the careful balance of power they've been working to establish, they launch a series of attacks designed to disrupt the research program and eliminate its key personnel. The first attack targets the Jedi Temple itself, with Sith agents attempting to destroy the archives where ancient texts are stored. The assault is repelled, but it demonstrates the enemy's determination to prevent the Jedi from expanding their understanding of the Force. The second attack is more personal, focusing on Anakin himself as the primary advocate for and practitioner of Grey Force techniques. A team of Sith assassins infiltrates Coruscant with the specific mission of eliminating him before he can complete his research. The attempt on his life becomes a turning point in Anakin's development as a Grey Force user. Using every technique he's learned from the ancient visions, enhanced by months of careful study and practice, he not only survives the assassination attempt, but captures several of the attackers alive. The interrogation of these prisoners reveals the scope of the Sith threat and their specific interest in preventing Jedi access to ancient knowledge. More disturbing, it becomes clear that the Sith have been conducting their own research into Grey Force techniques, attempting to extract and weaponize the darker elements while discarding the balancing aspects that prevent corruption. This intelligence forces the Jedi Council to accelerate their research program and expand it beyond the careful, methodical approach they had originally planned. The galaxy is clearly entering a period of conflict that will require new methods and new understanding if the Order is to survive and continue protecting innocent life. Working with Kef Vrad and other Grey Force users who have agreed to share their knowledge, Anakin begins training the first generation of Jedi to combine traditional light side techniques with ancient Grey methods. The process is challenging and sometimes dangerous, requiring students to confront aspects of themselves and the Force that orthodox training deliberately avoids. But the results are remarkable. Jedi who complete the combined training demonstrate enhanced abilities in every area of Force application. Their healing techniques are more effective, their combat skills more versatile, their diplomatic abilities more nuanced, and their resistance to dark side corruption more robust. Perhaps most importantly, these new Grey Jedi, as they begin to be called, show greater emotional stability and psychological resilience than their traditionally trained counterparts. By learning to work with their emotions rather than suppressing them, they develop more authentic relationships with others and more sustainable approaches to the stresses of their duties. Ahsoka Tano becomes one of the first graduates of the new program, and her transformation illustrates its potential. Where once she was prone to impulsiveness and emotional volatility, she now possesses a centeredness that allows her to remain effective under extreme pressure, while still maintaining her passion for justice and protection of innocence. Ahsoka. Master Anakin, I never understood before why the Jedi teachings always felt incomplete to me. It wasn't that they were wrong exactly, but they only addressed part of what I was experiencing as a Force user and as a person. Anakin. The traditional methods work for some people, Ahsoka, but they assume that everyone experiences the Force in the same way and responds to the same training approaches. The ancient techniques recognize that Force users are individuals with different strengths, different challenges, and different optimal paths to mastery. Ahsoka. It's strange to feel so much more stable now that I'm acknowledging and working with emotions I used to try to ignore. I would have expected the opposite. Anakin. That's because suppression takes constant energy. When you're always fighting against part of yourself, you can't access your full potential. When you learn to integrate all aspects of your nature, you become much more powerful and much more peaceful at the same time. As word of these successes spreads, Jedi from across the galaxy begin requesting transfer to Coruscant to participate in the Grey Force training program. The movement grows beyond what anyone anticipated. Driven by Force users who have long felt constrained by traditional doctrine and hungry for approaches that honor the full spectrum of their abilities and experiences. But the rapid expansion of the program also creates new challenges. Not all Jedi are suited for Grey Force training, and some who attempt it experience difficulties that require careful intervention to prevent negative outcomes. The research team develops increasingly sophisticated screening and monitoring procedures to ensure that only appropriate candidates are accepted and that all participants receive adequate support throughout their training. Meanwhile, the galactic political situation continues to deteriorate as various factions attempt to exploit the apparent divisions within the Jedi Order. Some Republic politicians try to use the controversy over Grey Force techniques to justify reducing Jedi authority and independence. Separatist movements point to Jedi experimentation with dark side methods as evidence that the Order can no longer be trusted to serve the public good. Most dangerous, Sith agents throughout the galaxy begin impersonating Grey Force users, committing atrocities while claiming to follow ancient techniques in order to discredit the entire movement. These false flag operations create confusion and fear among civilian populations who don't understand the differences between authentic Grey methods and Sith corruption. The crisis comes to a head when Chancellor Palpatine himself requests a private meeting with Anakin to discuss the security implications of the Jedi's new research program. The conversation takes place in the Chancellor's office, away from other Jedi who might provide support or witnesses to what transpires. Palpatine. Anakin, I must say, I've been following your research with great interest. The power you've uncovered could be exactly what the Republic needs to address the growing threats we face throughout the galaxy. Anakin, I appreciate your support, Chancellor, but I should clarify that these aren't new powers we've discovered. They're ancient techniques that have been forgotten for millennia. We're simply rediscovering knowledge that once was common among Force users. Palpatine. Of course. But the practical result is the same, isn't it? You and your fellow Grey Jedi possess abilities that far exceed those of traditionally trained Force users. Abilities that could end conflicts quickly, bring peace to troubled regions, and ensure the Republic's continued stability. Anakin. That's possible, but it's important to understand that these techniques come with responsibilities as well as capabilities. The ancient Force users who developed them understood that great power requires great wisdom to employ ethically. Palpatine. Naturally. But surely you can see that the current crisis requires more direct action than traditional Jedi methods allow. The separatist movement is gaining strength throughout the Outer Rim. Corporate interests are undermining democratic institutions, and criminal organizations operate with impunity in regions where Republic authority is weak. If you and your colleagues were willing to take a more active role in addressing these problems, many lives could be saved. The conversation continues for nearly an hour, with Palpatine carefully probing Anakin's attitudes about using Grey Force techniques for political purposes and his willingness to operate outside traditional Jedi constraints. But unlike in other timelines, Anakin's Grey Force training has given him enhanced ability to sense manipulation and resist emotional pressure. His ancient meditation techniques allow him to remain centered and objective throughout the discussion, while his understanding of emotional balance helps him recognize the subtle ways Palpatine is attempting to exploit his desire to help people. Most importantly, his training in working with dark side energies has made him sensitive to their presence in others, and he begins to detect disturbing undercurrents in the Chancellor's Force signature. Anakin: Chancellor, I appreciate your confidence in our abilities, but I think you may misunderstand what Grey Force techniques are designed to accomplish. They're not weapons for enforcing political will. They're tools for promoting genuine balance and understanding. The ancient practitioners who developed them were very careful about how and when they used their abilities, precisely because they understood how easy it would be to abuse such power. Palpatine: But Anakin, surely you see that sometimes force is necessary to protect the innocent and maintain order. The galaxy is full of beings who don't respond to diplomacy or reason, who only understand strength. In such cases, isn't it more moral to act decisively than to allow suffering to continue while we attempt less effective approaches? Anakin: That's exactly the kind of thinking that led to the corruption of the ancient practitioners, Chancellor. When you start believing that the ends justify any means, when you convince yourself that your vision of the greater good excuses actions that would otherwise be wrong, you're already on the path to becoming the very evil you claim to be fighting. The response clearly frustrates Palpatine, who had expected Anakin's emotional nature and desire to help others to make him more susceptible to manipulation. But the Grey Force training has given Anakin tools for channeling his emotions constructively rather than being controlled by them, and his enhanced sensitivity to dark side influences makes him increasingly uncomfortable with the Chancellor's presence. Palpatine: I see that your new training has made you cautious. Perhaps overly so. There are threats gathering that the Jedi Council doesn't fully understand, Anakin. Dangers that traditional methods will be inadequate to address. When the time comes, I hope you'll remember that sometimes good people must be willing to make difficult choices, Anakin. And I hope you'll remember, Chancellor, that the most difficult choice is often restraint rather than action. Power without wisdom leads to tyranny, no matter how good the intentions behind it might be. The meeting ends with both participants understanding that they've learned important things about each other. Palpatine realizes that his plans for manipulating Anakin will need significant revision, while Anakin begins to suspect that the Chancellor's interest in Grey Force techniques might not be as benevolent as it initially appeared. Following the meeting, Anakin reports his concerns to the Jedi Council and specifically requests that they investigate Palpatine's background more thoroughly. His Grey Force training has enhanced his intuitive abilities to the point where he can sense deception and hidden motivations much more clearly than traditional Jedi methods would allow. Master Windu: Anakin, those are serious accusations you're making. Chancellor Palpatine has been a faithful servant of the Republic for years, and he's shown nothing but support for the Jedi Order during his time in office. Anakin: I'm not making accusations, Master Windu. I'm reporting observations and requesting that we investigate them properly. My enhanced sensitivity to dark side energies detected something troubling about the Chancellor's Force signature, and his conversation patterns suggested manipulation techniques that aren't typically used by legitimate political leaders. Master Yoda: Felt something unusual, have you? Trust your insights, we should. But careful we must be. Dangerous, false accusations against the Chancellor could be Master Tai, what specifically did you sense? Can you describe the nature of the dark side presence you detected? Anakin, it was subtle, which is actually more concerning than if it had been obvious. Whoever or whatever is influencing the Chancellor has gone to great lengths to conceal their presence. The darkness I sensed felt ancient and powerful, but also patient and methodical. This isn't some recent corruption. It's something that's been building for a long time. The Council authorizes a discreet investigation into Palpatine's background and activities, using both traditional intelligence-gathering methods and the enhanced sensing abilities that Grey Force training provides. What they discover over the following weeks is deeply disturbing. Financial records show connections between Palpatine's political campaigns and shadowy organizations with ties to separatist movements. Communication logs reveal private meetings with individuals who later appeared in Sith operations. Most damning, ancient Sith artifacts begin appearing in archaeological sites associated with Palpatine's homeworld of Naboo, suggesting that someone with access to his resources has been conducting systematic searches for dark side knowledge. But the evidence, while suggestive, remains circumstantial. Palpatine is careful and intelligent, and he's constructed his operations to provide plausible alternative explanations for any individual piece of evidence. Proving his involvement in Sith activities will require either catching him in the act or finding a witness willing to testify against him. The opportunity comes when Kef Rad, working with Jedi intelligence assets, identifies a major Sith operation planned for the outer rim world of Geonosis. According to the intelligence they've gathered, a secret meeting is scheduled where Sith leadership will reveal their next phase of operations to their various allied organizations. The Jedi plan a complex infiltration mission designed to gather intelligence about Sith activities while avoiding direct confrontation that might provoke a larger conflict. But when they arrive at Geonosis, they discover that the meeting is far larger and more significant than their intelligence had suggested. Geonosis has become the center of a massive military buildup, with droid factories producing armies for what appears to be a coordinated rebellion against Republic authority. Separatist leaders from across the galaxy have gathered to finalize their plans for civil war, and at the center of the operation sits a figure that Anakin recognizes immediately: Chancellor Palpatine, revealing himself as the Sith Lord Darth Sidious. The revelation confirms Anakin's suspicions, but it also traps the Jedi team in an extremely dangerous situation. They're vastly outnumbered, surrounded by enemies, and facing a Sith Lord whose power far exceeds anything they've previously encountered. But Anakin's Grey Force training has prepared him for exactly this kind of situation. Unlike traditional Jedi, who might hesitate to use aggressive techniques or struggle with the fear and anger that such circumstances naturally provoke, he's learned to channel all of his emotions as sources of strength rather than weakness. The battle that follows becomes a demonstration of everything that Grey Force techniques can accomplish when wielded by someone who truly understands their principles. Anakin fights with a combination of light and dark side applications that confuses and overwhelms opponents trained to counter traditional Jedi methods, while his emotional balance allows him to remain strategically focused even in the chaos of large-scale combat. Working alongside other Grey Force users who have joined the mission, he coordinates a fighting retreat that allows the intelligence team to escape with crucial information about Sith plans while minimizing casualties on both sides. The operation succeeds not through overwhelming force or clever tricks, but through the kind of balanced application of power and restraint that the ancient Grey Wardens would have recognized. The intelligence they gather reveals the full scope of Palpatine's deception and provides the evidence needed to expose his true identity to the Republic. But it also makes clear that the galaxy is on the brink of a civil war that will test every institution and belief system to their limits. The Clone Wars that follow are unlike the conflict that occurred in other timelines. With the Jedi prepared for Palpatine's betrayal and equipped with Grey Force techniques that make them more adaptable and resilient, the war becomes a more even contest between competing visions of how the galaxy should be organized. The conflict spreads across thousands of star systems, but the nature of the fighting is fundamentally different from what it might have been. Instead of serving as generals in a conventional military campaign, the Grey-trained Jedi operate as specialized peacekeepers who work to minimize civilian casualties while achieving strategic objectives. Their enhanced abilities allow them to end conflicts quickly and decisively, often preventing the prolonged sieges and devastating battles that characterize traditional warfare. On Christophsis, Anakin leads a mission that exemplifies this new approach. Rather than engaging the Separatist droid army in direct combat, his team uses Grey Force techniques to infiltrate the enemy command structure and convince key leaders that their cause has been compromised by Sith manipulation. The revelation that they've been deceived leads to mass defections that end the occupation without a single shot being fired. On Ryloth, Ahsoka demonstrates the humanitarian applications of Grey Force training by establishing refugee camps that use ancient healing techniques to treat both physical injuries and psychological trauma. Her ability to work with rather than against negative emotions allows her to help civilians process their experiences of war in ways that promote genuine recovery rather than mere suppression of symptoms. The Separatist response to these new Jedi capabilities evolves throughout the conflict. Initially caught off guard by techniques they don't understand, they begin developing countermeasures based on intelligence gathered from captured Grey Force users and stolen Jedi archives. This leads to an escalating cycle of innovation as both sides attempt to gain tactical advantages through new applications of Force knowledge. More concerning for the Jedi, they discover that some Separatist leaders have begun experimenting with corrupted versions of ancient techniques, using fragments of Grey Warden knowledge to enhance their own Force abilities without the ethical constraints that prevent abuse. These dark practitioners represent a new kind of threat, more sophisticated than traditional Sith, but equally dangerous in their willingness to sacrifice others for their vision of galactic order. Anakin emerges as one of the key leaders of the Jedi response, not because of his raw power or his prophetic significance, but because his understanding of Grey Force philosophy allows him to navigate the complex moral challenges that the conflict presents. He leads missions that blur the traditional boundaries between military operations and humanitarian aid, using his abilities to protect civilians while disrupting enemy operations. Most importantly, his example inspires other Jedi to embrace more flexible and inclusive approaches to their duties. The Order gradually evolves from a rigid institution focused on maintaining existing power structures to a dynamic organization dedicated to promoting genuine justice and balance throughout the galaxy. The war's climax comes when Anakin finally faces Palpatine in direct combat, armed with his black lightsaber and backed by the full knowledge of ancient Grey Force techniques. The confrontation takes place in the ruins of an ancient Grey Warden temple on a forgotten world in the deep core, where archaeological evidence suggests the first Force users once gathered to share knowledge and wisdom. The setting is symbolic as well as strategic. Palpatine has chosen this location because he believes the lingering dark side energies from the temple's destruction will give him an advantage. But Anakin recognizes the deeper significance. This is where the Force tradition that preceded both Jedi and Sith achieved its greatest triumphs and suffered its ultimate failure. It's an appropriate place to determine whether that ancient wisdom can finally be restored to the galaxy. The duel is not just a physical confrontation, but a philosophical one, representing the fundamental choice between balance and extremism that will determine the galaxy's future. Every strike and parry carries the weight of competing worldviews, as each combatant attempts to prove through action that their understanding of the Force is superior. Palpatine opens with traditional Sith aggression, unleashing a barrage of Force lightning, followed by a series of vicious lightsaber attacks designed to overwhelm his opponent through sheer power and intensity. His movements are fluid and deadly, perfected through decades of secret training and enhanced by his deep connection to the dark side. Each strike carries enough force to shatter stone, and his use of the Force creates waves of pressure that would disorient most opponents. But Anakin doesn't respond in kind. Instead of matching aggression with aggression, he flows between defensive and offensive techniques, with a fluidity that makes prediction impossible. When Palpatine attacks high, Anakin's black blade is there to intercept. When the Sith Lord attempts to use the Force to throw debris, Anakin redirects the objects harmlessly aside, while stepping forward to press his own attack. Palpatine, you think your ancient tricks will save you, boy? I have studied the dark side for decades, mastered powers that your gray philosophies can barely comprehend. The weakness of the Grey Wardens led to their destruction, and it will lead to yours. Anakin, you've mastered half the Force, Master. That's impressive, but it's not complete. The ancient practitioners understood that true mastery comes from synthesis, not domination. Their civilization didn't fall because their methods were weak. It fell because they became rigid and lost sight of the principles that made them strong. The exchange of words is accompanied by an increasingly intense exchange of blows. Palpatine's attacks grow more desperate as he realizes that traditional Sith techniques are insufficient against an opponent who has trained to counter both light and dark side applications. His Force lightning is absorbed and redirected. His physical strikes are anticipated and countered, and his attempts at psychological manipulation find no purchase against Anakin's emotional balance. The fight showcases the differences between their approaches to power. Palpatine relies on overwhelming force and emotional manipulation, using traditional Sith techniques enhanced by fragments of ancient knowledge that he's attempted to corrupt for his own purposes. His every action is designed to inspire fear, anger, or despair in his opponent, emotions that he can then exploit to create openings for decisive attacks. Anakin responds with perfect balance, channeling light and dark energies seamlessly, while maintaining complete emotional and strategic control. He acknowledges each emotion that Palpatine's attacks provoke, but doesn't allow any single feeling to dominate his responses. Fear provides caution, anger supplies energy, love offers motivation, and compassion ensures that he fights to protect rather than to destroy. The turning point comes when Palpatine recognizes that conventional methods will not be sufficient and begins drawing on the corrupted Grey Warden techniques he spent years developing. These abilities are more dangerous than traditional Sith powers because they incorporate elements that should provide balance and stability, but have been twisted to serve domination and control. Palpatine unleashes a wave of Force energy that doesn't simply attack Anakin's body, but attempts to destabilize his connection to the ancient techniques by exploiting the potential contradictions between light and dark side applications. It's a sophisticated assault that would have devastating effects on someone who hadn't achieved genuine synthesis of opposing forces. But Anakin's training has prepared him for exactly this kind of attack. The months he spent learning to integrate all aspects of the Force have given him a stability that can't be shaken by external manipulation. He absorbs the corrupted energy, processes it through his understanding of true gray balance, and returns it to Palpatine, purified of its malevolent intent. The result is a feedback effect that disrupts Palpatine's own connection to the dark side, leaving him momentarily vulnerable. In that instant of weakness, Anakin sees not an opportunity for revenge, but a chance to offer redemption. The decisive moment comes when Palpatine attempts to corrupt Anakin by showing him visions of Padme dying, trying to exploit his emotional attachments as a source of weakness. But Anakin's Grey Force training has taught him to use his love as a source of strength rather than vulnerability. Anakin, you're right that I love her. I love her so much that I'll do whatever is necessary to create a galaxy where she and others like her can live in peace and freedom. That means stopping you, no matter what. It costs me personally. With a final strike that combines every technique he's learned from the ancient traditions, Anakin defeats Palpatine and ends the Sith threat that has shadowed the galaxy for generations. But victory doesn't mean the establishment of a new order based on Grey Force philosophy. Instead, it means the beginning of a new era of cooperation and understanding between different approaches to the Force. In the aftermath of the war, Anakin helps establish institutions that support Force users of all traditions. Jedi who maintain their commitment to light side philosophy, former Sith who seek redemption through balanced approaches, and new Grey practitioners who represent synthesis of ancient and modern understanding. The process of rebuilding galactic civilization proves as challenging as the war itself, but in different ways. With the Sith threat eliminated and the corrupt elements of the Republic exposed, the galaxy faces the task of creating new institutions that can serve diverse populations without imposing uniformity or suppressing legitimate differences. The first major initiative is the establishment of Force user academies on dozens of worlds, each one designed to serve students with different backgrounds, abilities, and philosophical inclinations. Some maintain traditional Jedi approaches for those who thrive under structured light side training. Others offer programs specifically designed for individuals who need to integrate difficult emotional experiences or overcome trauma associated with dark side corruption. Most innovative are the Grey Academies, which welcome students from all Force traditions and focus on teaching practical applications of ancient synthesis techniques. These institutions become laboratories for rediscovering lost knowledge while developing new methods appropriate for contemporary challenges. Anakin personally oversees the establishment of the primary Grey Academy on Tython, the legendary birthplace of the Force traditions. The choice of location is symbolic, representing a return to the roots of Force, understanding that preceded the artificial divisions between light and dark. Students at the Tython Academy learn from instructors representing every major Force tradition, ensuring that they graduate with comprehensive understanding rather than narrow specialization. The curriculum includes not only Force techniques and lightsaber combat, but also ethics, psychology, conflict resolution, and practical skills needed for humanitarian work. Graduates are expected to be capable of functioning as healers, mediators, defenders, teachers, or whatever role their communities most need them to fill. Perhaps most importantly, the new institutions emphasize service to living beings rather than abstract principles or political systems. Students learn to evaluate their actions based on practical outcomes for the people they're trying to help, rather than compliance with ideological purity tests or institutional loyalty requirements. The galaxy that emerges is more diverse and resilient than what came before, able to adapt to new challenges while maintaining core commitments to justice and protection of innocent life. Conflicts still arise, but they're addressed more quickly and effectively by Force users who have been trained to work with rather than against the complexities of real-world situations. Trade disputes that might once have escalated into system-wide wars are resolved through mediation techniques that address underlying economic and cultural factors. Political corruption is exposed and countered by investigators who can sense deception and manipulation in ways that conventional oversight cannot match. Natural disasters receive coordinated responses from teams that combine Force-enhanced rescue capabilities with sophisticated understanding of trauma, recovery, and community rebuilding. The transformation isn't limited to Force users. Inspired by the example of Grey practitioners who demonstrate that power can be wielded responsibly and effectively, civilian organizations throughout the galaxy begin adopting similar principles in their own work. Corporations experiment with business models that prioritize long-term sustainability over short-term profits. Political movements focus on practical solutions rather than ideological purity. Educational institutions teach critical thinking and ethical reasoning, alongside technical skills. Most significantly, the artificial barriers that once divided different Force traditions begin to break down as practitioners discover that they have more in common than their historical differences might suggest. Former Jedi learn to acknowledge and work with emotions they were once taught to suppress. Reformed Sith discover that compassion and cooperation can be more effective than domination and fear. Independent Force users find communities where their unconventional approaches are welcomed rather than feared. Years later, as Master Anakin Skywalker trains a new generation of Force users who will never know the artificial divisions that once separated Jedi from Sith, he often reflects on the vision that started his journey. The ancient Grey Wardens were right. Balance is not the absence of conflict, but the wisdom to know when each element of existence has its proper place. The students under his guidance represent every species, every world, and every Force tradition in the galaxy. Some show natural affinity for light side techniques. Others gravitate toward applications that earlier generations would have classified as dark, and many demonstrate the kind of synthesis that the ancient practitioners would have recognized immediately. But all of them learn to use their abilities in service to something larger than themselves. During training exercises, he watches them work together to solve complex problems that require multiple approaches and perspectives. A Twi'lek student whose homeworld was devastated by corporate exploitation uses her understanding of anger and justice to motivate a Corellian classmate who tends toward excessive caution. A former Imperial officer who joined the Academy seeking redemption for his past actions employs his strategic thinking to help a group of younger students plan a humanitarian mission to refugee camps. These interactions represent the kind of cooperation and mutual support that the galaxy desperately needed during the dark years of division and conflict. They're proof that the artificial barriers between different Force traditions were exactly that. Artificial constructs that served political purposes rather than reflecting genuine differences in capability or moral worth. His black lightsaber hangs at his side, no longer a symbol of rebellion against tradition, but an emblem of evolution beyond the limitations that once constrained the galaxy's understanding of what Force users could become. The weapon that once threatened to divide the Jedi Order has instead become the foundation for uniting all beings who seek to serve the Force's deeper purposes. The choice he made in that ancient chamber beneath Ilum has led not to darkness or light, but to something far more precious. The possibility that future generations will grow up in a galaxy where wisdom matters more than ideology, where service matters more than power, and where the Force itself is honored in all its infinite complexity and beauty. That's our theory. The Star Wars universe is a galaxy filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey to a galaxy far, far away, then please like, share, and subscribe to our channel.